Thank you, Emer, and good morning, everybody. I am delighted to be part of this session to represent the authors from the climate chapter, and indeed to say thank you to my colleagues across the whole climate team and the wider organisation, and indeed the reviewers of this chapter as well. I'm really looking forward to hearing from the other speakers and also to engaging with yourselves in the Q&A session. The title of my talk today is Paths to Achieve Our Climate Goals, and I'm going to explore this topic through the four main messages from our chapter on climate change in the SOER. These centre around the science, our understanding of climate science and the current and future impacts of climate change in Ireland. The importance of us adapting and building resilience to climate change here in Ireland. The importance of us reducing our greenhouse gas emissions and to take account of the scale and the pace of action that's needed for us to achieve our national and EU targets. And finally, I'm going to speak about the people and the communities and the importance of supporting and understanding people as we move to achieve our climate goals, but also as we develop and implement climate policy. So we are living in and experiencing a changing climate. With each new season, the news cycle brings us new stories, new headlines of extreme weather events and their impacts around the world. This day last week, the people of Florida awaited their fate, and weather forecasters around the world watched record-breaking development of Storm Milton in the Gulf of Mexico. At the weekend, that headline was replaced by the extreme winds and rain in Brazil, where Sao Paulo came into the headlines as this extreme weather event brought an end to the drought that had racked the country for several months. Closer to home in September, in parts of Central and Eastern Europe, we saw extreme rainfall associated with Storm Boris, and this brought rainfall almost 2/3 of the annual rainfall level over a couple of days. While here in Ireland, we saw last October, almost to this week in fact, we saw the devastation that was brought to Middleton as a result of extreme rainfall associated with Storm Babette. Through the media, through the headlines associated with these extreme events, the message of climate change and the impact of climate change comes into our own homes. It connects us in our daily lives with the key messages from our climate scientists. And those messages are clear, they're stark, and they're challenging. The 6th assessment report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change tells us that widespread and rapid changes in the atmosphere, the oceans, the cryosphere, and biosphere have occurred. Continued greenhouse gas emissions will lead to increasing global warming, and indeed the best estimates are indicating that we will reach a decadal average of 1.5 degree warming in the near term without the immediate and rapid reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. We have already seen the first 12-month period to exceed 1.5 degree of warming earlier this year, when we saw the average of temperatures between February 23 and January 2024. And what does that mean for us here in Ireland? Well, Ireland's Climate Change Assessment Report, which is modelled on the work of the IPCC, echoes what has been found globally. Our climate in Ireland is changing, and we are not prepared. In line with global trends, Ireland's annual average temperature has increased by 1 degree Celsius over the last 100 years, and 16 of the past 20 years, it was the 20 warmest years occurring since 1990, with 2023 being the hottest year on record. We see extremes of heat in Ireland become more frequent and more severe, while we also see, on the other hand, as much as we may not welcome it as much as we'd like a fine day, we see the extremes of cold are becoming less frequent and less severe. And this is a concern. We see heat waves such as those that we experienced in 2022, where we saw a maximum temperature of 33 degrees in Phoenix Park, are more likely to occur due to climate change. Heavy rainfall events are 7% more intense over the last 30 years when compared to the previous 30 years, with evidence linking these to the effects of climate change. While there's evidence across the years 72 to 2017 that we see our river flows have increased. In more recent years, we also see that the frequency and severity of droughts, particularly in the eastern region, are more likely. And we also see in our marine environment, our sea level rise has risen by approximately 2 to 3 millimetres a year since the early 1990s. And the sea surface temperature and the heat embodied in our oceans have also increased, consistent with what's happening on a global level. And these changes bring impacts. They bring impacts to our daily lives, they bring impacts to our infrastructure, our health and well-being, and our biodiversity and our environment. When we consider the wide-ranging impacts, particularly just to explore our critical infrastructure, we are exposed in terms of our transport infrastructure, in terms of increases in sea levels and fluvial flooding. Our electricity distribution network and our water treatment, our wastewater distribution networks, our information and communications technology infrastructure, and the risk are all at risk from extreme weather events, including high wind speed, increased precipitation, and saturated soils and flooding. Failures in our infrastructure can cascade across sectors and present a multi-sector risk. For example, we think about how we are moving to electrify our lives and electrification across multiple systems. We can see that our power supply interruption would have significant increased impact on our transport, our domestic heating, our industry, our health services than was previously the case. And it's not just about our systems and our built environment. It's also how climate change impacts our people, how it impacts us and our health and our well-being. While excess cold mortality rates as a result of fewer cold extremes in winter may be welcomed, on the other hand, as our ageing population experiences additional and more severe heat events, we may see increased heat stress events and impacting on our aged population. Longer growing seasons may lead to an increase in respiratory diseases such as asthma as a result of increased circulation of pollen and spores, as well as public health issues arising from poor water quality associated with rainfall and flooding. We can also not underestimate the consequences of the impact on our psychological health and our well-being as we cope and as we adjust to a sense of loss in our loss of valued places, flooding and other extremes. Warmer and wetter weather may enhance environmental conditions that support bacterial growth and viral survival with the potential increase in our foodborne diseases. Increase in the frequency of heat waves and droughts are projected to result in increased frequency in wildfires damaging forest stands. So while we take account of the clear messages from climate scientists, we know that climate change is already having an impact on our people, our animals, our plants, and the science is unequivocal. The severity of the impacts is likely to increase significantly in coming years. But we need to build our resilience and we need to adapt to the changes. We know that the implementation of climate adaptation measures have been slow, and more cross-sectoral and integrated adaptation actions can deliver multiple benefits. Doing better requires more financing, working with people, working with nature, and enhanced monitoring evaluation of the outcomes of the actions that we undertake. And it also requires more public and private involvement. Until recently, climate action in Ireland was largely focused on mitigation. And the key message from the State of the Environment report is that we need to also focus strongly on adaptation and building our resilience. Actions taken now to reduce vulnerability and exposure and increase resilience will shape the Irish future and should be seen as an investment rather than a short-term cost. A key action in this area is the development of Ireland's first national climate change assessment, which Andy mentioned earlier. This will inform adaptation planning and decision making and is very much aligned to the work that has happened at a European level and indeed in other countries around the world. The NCCRA will set out the priority impacts for climate change in Ireland and will form a national prioritised list, a national climate change risk register, so to speak, which will inform and provide a basis for decision making in this space. But adapting and building our resilience alone will not be enough in terms of our climate actions and in terms of how we can meet our climate goal. Ireland is not currently projected to achieve its 2030 emissions targets, despite a very strong climate ambition in Ireland. We need to move more quickly, we need to significantly progress our actions to decarbonise all sectors of Ireland's economy and implement adaptation actions to deliver a resilient and sustainable future for the benefit of society. There has been concerted action and we do see progress. The 2023 greenhouse gas emissions inventory indicates that Ireland's emissions were at their lowest level in 3 decades. A decrease in our emissions of 6.8% was the largest single-year decrease in greenhouse gas emissions outside of a recessionary period. To achieve this took significant effort and should not be underestimated, but we still need to pick up the pace, we need to build momentum, we need to take this significant piece of progress and build on it in order to achieve our 2030 targets. What the data is telling us is that reaching these targets at a national and a EU level will require urgent identification and implementation of our policies that are required to deliver emissions reductions across all sectors in the short term, and that this will provide a foundation for climate neutrality in the future. Current decarbonisation actions in Ireland are being outpaced by increased energy demand across the economy and heavy dependence on fossil fuel, which was mentioned earlier today. Although we have made significant progress in terms of increasing our renewable energy share, what we are seeing is that we need to escalate and we need to increase the rate at which we transition. We also see this, and this has an impact not just directly on our electricity sector, but also as we look across our heat and our transport sectors as well. Significant emissions reductions are also needed in the agriculture sector, Ireland's largest source of greenhouse gas emissions, and the innovation there in order to reduce emissions needs to see a rapid uptake of new technologies such as feed additives and new fertilisers. We know that land, as Andy outlined this morning, can play a much stronger role in reducing greenhouse gas emissions and moving from the current state of being a net source to be a sink, and this will necessitate increased deforestation. A continued lack of large-scale practical actions in order to decarbonise our activities across all sectors will see us miss our targets. It is important for us, if we are to develop the world-class infrastructure that takes significant time, that takes significant investment, that we need to accelerate the pace and implementation. We know that the time horizon for which we need to act is becoming increasingly short, and this can only be delivered through innovation and decarbonisation actions. This also brings me on to the final point, the people and communities. Because as we look through the impacts that occur in relation to climate, it's not just what often grabs the headlines is the impact. It's the extreme event, it's the record-breaking wind speeds, it's the record-breaking floods. When the headline moves on, often we forget about the people, we forget about the long-lasting damage, and it's important that as we develop our understanding of the impacts of climate change, that we put people and community at the heart of these changes. It is critical that people and communities are supported to achieve the changes that are required to address climate change, to overcome the practical barriers to climate action, and to ensure that objectives are both equitable and achievable. To do this, it's important that we understand the beliefs, the attitudes, and the challenges that people face in relation to climate action, and that the policies that we design and implement are policies that promote that promote the adoption of these actions as being desirable and that these become the default action. The Climate Change in the Irish Mind survey tells us that Irish people want to play their part. We know that Irish people, as we can see here from our Climate Changes for Ireland, are alarmed and they're concerned when it comes to climate change. They also see that Ireland is not too small to act, that we must play our part, and that we also see that the transition needs to be fair and it needs to be balanced. There will be many opportunities in this transition, but there will also be significant challenges for some. It is essential that as we design our systems, as we consider the climate change actions that we need to take, that we do so taking a systemic and holistic and a new way of thinking. It is important that we build a vision that takes account of the changes that need to be made and that we support our people and our communities as we move towards 2030 and towards climate neutrality in 2050. Public participation and engagement in the development of policy and climate action is essential. People accept the science on climate change and understand that more action is needed. However, fairness and just transition are also highly valued, and people have practical concerns about some climate policies. So ongoing engagement and communication are vital to ensure that policy is designed effectively and so that the right path is also the easiest path for the decision. It's easy to think and to fear that climate action will bring many uncomfortable changes, and as I highlighted, there will be challenges. There are also benefits. Who would not like an environment where we have cleaner air, cleaner water, that our inside air and our external air is of better quality? A vision for the future for society, for across society, we have access to good public transport, where we have access to clean and green and blue spaces, where our energy is cheaper, where we've got greater energy security, and where our urban environments are pleasant places to be. Security in terms of our food and our land system can all support a sustainable economic development. So when we consider the paths towards achieving our climate goals, it's important that we take action, that we understand the challenge, that we understand the barriers that people face, and that we have a vision for a positive future. Thank you.